Welcome everybody to the fall session of Access Lunchtime. Today's talk is to provide some updates on the VBA Microsoft Graph tool that I have published on GitHub. So this is the link here that I'm just under the releases. And in particular, there are a couple things that I released a couple months ago that I wanted to cover that I haven't yet presented on. I did present on this topic without some of the options this fall, and if you attended the Access DevCon, I also presented on this at DevCon. So you may have heard some of this before. I'm not going to go through the entire deck and details about everything, but I'll hopefully highlight the new stuff. So the new things that I added, and I'm going to explain more about this, but to use a different optional type of authorization. So there's an option to use client credentials as opposed to an authorization code. I also added the form that demos the use of listing emails because that was one of the big asks from people. And added the ability to have multiple attachments. That was again a comment by someone who is using this tool. And I tightened up the recipient and attendee pieces to allow a little bit more flexibility, trailing spaces and semicolons instead of commas and some things like that. And then I also put in a bug fix for the Edge browser control, which is my default use during the authorization code type authorization, to wait for it to finish being ready before navigating because it was throwing an error in some cases. So we're going to talk about working with the Microsoft Graph API from VBA. And my code samples is using Microsoft Access. But with one exception, which I will point out, you should be able to use the same techniques here from other VBA like Excel or whatever, PowerPoint, Word. So let's go through and talk a little bit about the differences and the new things. So the last time that you saw me present on this in the fall, the only kind of access that I allowed was or covered was this here, on the left, the delegated access. And that is where you are authorizing as an individual user in a Microsoft 365 account. And so then that uses also some information from the app and then totally adds the two of those together and gets the data, the Office 365 data. But there's another kind of access that you can use, which is app-only access. So you don't have to go through an individual user at all. Your app has all the credentials. So this one on the left is access on behalf of a user. The one on the right is access by the application without the need for a particular user in the authentication part. And you'll see what the differences are here. So this covers the basic requirements here of the delegated, which is the user-based, versus the app-only. The user actually signs into Microsoft Graph using their login. And then the API calls are all using the /me alias to operate on the signed-in user. So if you send an email, the email would come from me, for example. And I would be able to see that email in my sent mailbox. If it's app only, the application acts on behalf of a user. You do have to actually include the user's principal, like the email address, in the API call. So you're kind of doing it on behalf of a user, but not necessarily the signed in user. So in the case of app only, you can include, for example, shared mailboxes or folders to send something to or to look at. You can also do things like, well, I included that down here, but you can include actions taken on others in your company. For example, if you had an order that you were working on in your application, then you could send an email about that order from the sales rep that was associated with that order instead of for whoever was entering information about that order or taking notes on the order or doing are requested the first time the user logs in, which means by permissions, I mean things like Microsoft Graph wants your permission to be able to read emails, to be able to write information about users, whatever permissions that are required to be granted in the Microsoft 365 space, those are requested the first time the user logs in. For the app only, the application owner sets up the permissions during application registration and then grants admin consent on behalf of all the users in the organization to do those things that the app is going to do. And then there's a grant type that's used in the authorization request itself, and it's called authorization code in the case of delegated and client credentials in the case of grant type. So for the application itself, what I did in the admin table, if you saw this previously in previous things here, you would have recognized the client ID and the tenant ID. I added a new field called the client secret, and that's only needed for the app only. And then I allowed you to change the grant type to either client credentials, which is for the app only, or authorization code, which is what I originally supported. And authorization code grant type was hard coded originally. I am going to add that, okay, I did show you where to download this if you wanted to download. These slides are all on the that GitHub for you to follow along. So the next couple slides here, I'm just going to breeze through most of them. The first step to authentication is to add an application to Microsoft Entra. And so slides 7 through 12 in here are exactly the same no matter which type of authentication that you use. You have to go into Microsoft Entra ID on Azure, and you have to add an application. You have to give it, and you need this client ID and directory tenant ID from that. Then you have to use the redirect URL to add a platform, and you have to add this mobile and desktop applications and configure that. This is, I think, checked by default. And so this just shows everything in that first step. So if you're going to use delegated access, where you have them sign in as a user, like was in the previous example that's on YouTube now from last fall, you would stop here in your setup. And then you would move on to step 2, which is on slide 16. If you want to use the app only access, then there's some more steps. And so I'm going to go a little slower here with these steps. You have to create a client secret. And then you take that client secret and the value that it shows here, and I blanked it out, but it's similar to what the tenant ID and the let's see, client ID look like. It's a like a GUI type um, big string character, big multi-character string. So you just copy it and you paste it into the client secret space in that table. And then you go in and you have to go in manage here instead of first you did clients and secrets, then you go to API permissions. And here you have to choose Microsoft Graph. And then here is where by typing in the search, all the permissions that your application needs, like mail.read-write, you search, you select, and you add the permissions. And then if after yes, the secret value is a GUI type format, Adrian. After you add all the permissions you need, like in this case, I've got like 5 different permissions that were added. And you're going to see those in the next screen here. After you add them all, then they're listed, and then it'll tell you whether the admin consent is required and then whether it's granted or not. And you have to do this extra step where you click on this box here to grant admin consent. And then it pops you up with an extra box and you say yes. And then you have granted consent on behalf of all the users in your organization as an application owner. So questions about this so far?
Nothing in the chat apart from the one that you answered for Adrian.
Yeah, with the secret. Okay. Let's go on here then. All right. So the next step in a process is to authenticate it to get a token. And that to do that in the Access sample, I created my own 2 objects. I started with Tim Hall's VBA-Web tools project. So some of these modules that are in here are straight from his project. And then I added a couple more. You'll see in modules, there's several modules here and several class modules. Most of these are straight from his tool. The 2 that I added are the GraphAuthenticator, which does the authentication piece for Microsoft Graph, and the Graph module, which does the interface of the API calls to get the relative data. So those are the 2 pieces that I added. The actual authentication part that I actually took a copy of the Google Authenticator that he had and updated it. I modernized it by adding having the Authenticator piece, and it's only the piece that's used in the user-based per user authentication. You don't even use this part if you're doing the app-based. Is this part 2 of a presentation? Ben, yes, it kind of is. I did a similar presentation in introduction to this topic this fall. And we do have on YouTube in lunchtime the first presentation. And at that time, I only had the one type of authentication, the per user authentication. Since then, I've added a second type. And so this presentation is designed to update you on the status of the project. So I'm not covering some of the same things. Yeah, just to clarify what Graph is, Microsoft Graph is a means of getting at the Microsoft data structure. Most of it is what?
Metadata.
Metadata. Most of it is Office-based. You can get things like the users, you can get mail, you can get calendar events. If you've got some kind of a folder structure, you can get information about that. And there is links in here to how you look at all the different varieties of data that you can access through the Microsoft Graph. But if we think about this in what started this whole project, when the way to interface with email from Microsoft Access or from VBA as a whole was to use the Object.com library. And we know that with the modernized Outlook that they are now working on and trying to deploy to everybody, they are making that web-based, and it will not have any COM object support. So this was a look at a way around that. However, there's a much broader use. So the Graph API gives you access to mail, kind of going out to the web where, or not kind of, it is going out to the web to your Office data to get that information, not to the Outlook client, which is what we used to do. I hope that helps with some of that answering. Sorry about the kind of side note there. Okay, so I do want to say, yeah, it has nothing to do with charting, which is what I first was thinking about. So I do want to talk here about the Edge browser for those that might be viewing this that are not using Access and are using VBA itself. And in the authentication here, so I'm in GraphAuthenticator. And incidentally, this is the actual authentication before it actually goes out and makes an API call. It executes this code and does the authentication. It looks for tokens, which is how Graph does the authentication. And if the token's not set, if the grant type is the authorization code, which is the user-based authentication, then it goes through this, it looks for an authorization code. And if it's not there, it goes through a login process. If it's not authorization code, it goes straight to get the token. It doesn't need an authorization code. And in this case, the actual get token process will use that client secret as the additional, instead of the authorization code, which is obtained through the user. So it is this process right here, this login process, that uses the Edge browser. So I'm going to go to that here. And right here, it's got a comment. If you have access with the new web browser control, then you can use this. You don't have to. If you would prefer, you can use instead the commented out login procedure, which is a slightly modified procedure based on Tim Hall's project that uses Internet Explorer to do the authentication part. So if you're using VBA not in Access, you need to use this sub instead of the one that's uncommented. Even if you are using Access, if you have an older version of Access that doesn't have Edge, or if you just don't like Edge, or you can't get Edge to work, you could use the other one. But this one uses Edge. So I did want to point that part out. And then we're going to authenticate to get a token. A token lifetime is randomly assigned when you get it. It lasts about 60 to 90 minutes. And then what happens is that there's code in these API calls that if you get a message back that says your token's expired, it goes out and requests the token for you again. So I do have that code in here in that would be in the module, not the class module, to go back and get the tokens if they expire, the new tokens. And the way to get the token is a two-step process for those where it's delegated access. So where the grant type is authorization code, it first uses this to go and pull up that Edge browser, and it will have you log in, and it will redirect you, and you might have to authorize the first time to go ahead and do the read mail permissions, whatever mail permissions are requested, and then it gets an authorization code. For the second kind, it goes straight to this screen where it's making a token request, and it puts in those values from the table for the tenant ID that you copied during setup, for the client ID, for the authorization code if you're doing the first type, or if you're doing the second type, it instead of using authorization type, it uses the client secret. The other thing that's different about the two types of actual token requests is notice that the scope here is default. The scope is based on the permissions for Graph API. I'm going to go backwards here a second. The scope here, I just put mail read write for simplification, but you would put all of your scopes, like mail read write, comma, whatever other scopes you had. That's the permissions that end up being requested as part of this. And then the difference between the two types of authentication also make a difference ultimately as to what the web API calls look like. They all use the graph Microsoft.com version 1.0 plus the actual HTTP request endpoint like SendMail here, but there's a preface to it that in the user-based, it uses me, which means the authenticated user. In the case of app-only, when it's not delegated, you actually have to put users and then a slash and then the user principal, which there's different types of principals you can use, but I was using in my examples the actual email address. So for me, it would be mbarnes@barnesbusinesssolutions.com. The scopes are defined in app or in Entra. So Neil, for the app only, you have to choose during application setup which scopes you want. And then you can add to that if you need to add to that. In the case of the user base, I put in here default in the actual graph setup the ones that I wanted. So these are the ones that I need for the examples in this. So there's forms to create a contact. There's forms to create a calendar event. There's forms to list the contacts, to list email messages, or to send an email message. So to do all of those things, you would need these permissions or scope from Graph API. So I hard-coded those in there. You could add to that if you wanted to. So this talks about the scopes in general, or the graph in general. And from here, this is a good example of all the different types of data you can get to from Microsoft Graph. And then if you look at the navigation here, there is an API reference that talks about the endpoints and everything that is available. And within that, they are divided up here. So for example, if you were wanting to look at users and you were wanting to create a user, this is the information that you would need to make that API call. It talks about the actual request. So this is kind of the endpoint that you need to add to your basic base endpoint for this. Here we go, up here, permission types. So if you've got a delegated permission type, then you would need user read write all or directory read write all, and very similar. So this is how you get that scope information by tracing through the information depending upon what it is that you wanted to do. For example, for mail, if you need to send mail, then that is going to be exposed through the send mail, either me or users, and then their principal name, and you need the mail send permission to be able to do that. So hopefully that gives you what you need for that. Okay, and then also in that same documentation, it'll tell you the method. Most of them are either post or get as far as the API method. And these are the interface functions that I put in this tool. This is the function in the graph module that I've got here. So if you are looking in the graph module here, which I'm going to show it in a second, these would be the different subs or functions that you would have that do the various things. So in graph here, this one happens to be get client, but if you were wanting to talk about, GraphSendMail and how to send mail, this is the function that's called by my sample form to actually access the send mail and to build the web pages or the API and stuff like that to make the call to return the data. And notice how it's smart enough to look up various things and put the actual resource that's called, and it differentiates between me or users and the user principal based on the grant type and what it is. And you will also actually find in this that the forms are different. So for this one, like the CreateContact form, I added a from whose mails box, which when you create contact, it's required that you fill that out if you're using client credentials. If you instead use the authorization code, then the form is smart enough to not display that because it doesn't need that because it's going to be sending as me. So to answer your question, Neil, the question is, if you have an app with permissions, does it automatically have permissions to act on behalf of any user? So if you're using app-based permissions during your setup, you add the permissions that your app is going to need, and then you grant administrator privileges for all of those permissions on behalf of all users in your organization. So the only way to keep the benefit of having the users be able to define their own permissions is if you use the user-based permissions. My recommendation would be that you stick with user-based permissions or the delegated if you can. If you don't need to do things like send email on behalf of a shared mailbox or send email on behalf of a sales rep as opposed to the person who's doing the admin in the app. So, it's safer, or, you're using less global permissions if you use the user-based permissions, then your users get to allow. So there is no way, Colin, to send email from an email address that is not part of your Office 365 system. You're logging in with a particular client, and it has to be an authenticated, valid person or mailbox. It can be a group one, but it can't be a non-valid account. You can set up group emails that that have like an out of office that does no reply. That's what I've used in some clients where they, like, for instance, we have letters that get sent to different people, and we don't want that group email to be replied to, but at least the system I used, there was no way to set it up as an actual no reply address. You just set it up with like a permanent out of office that says no reply, and you state in the email body of the email, do not reply and stuff like that. But so then if you're taking a look at the API reference from Microsoft on the Graph API, this is a section you would look in. You would look in Mail, under Messages, in Mail, under Mail folder. So that's what this is about. And if you want to try it out, you use these forms in the application. And I'm just going to say here that these forms were not probably designed to actually be used in an application. For example, the send email, it like prompts you with all the fields and enter in all the fields, the subject matter, the to, the whatever, and then hit the button. The purpose is to show you how to use those fields and the functions, these interface functions in the Graph module within your application. So if you were going to send an email in your application, you probably already know who you're sending it to, who it's from, what the subject matter is. Maybe it's this project moved from point A to point B, and so you want to email the people in charge of the step B for the project or whatever. So, the forms that are here in my sample aren't necessarily designed to be used out of the box, but to show you how to interface with the interface functions. So that's really it. These are the steps to it. And I've got a couple of resources here. And so then I am just going to open it up. And if you would like, we can try any of these things that you would like to try in an actual connected copy of the application. So one of the new ones that I did was ListMessages. So, and that was a request. So this chooses or you put in the folder name, and I'm not going to do my inbox because my inbox is really big, and all this form does is display a few fields in the inbox, but I'm going to do my junk email. So this is my junk email folder. I think it's actually called this. Yep. It's got 26 emails. I happen to list on here, and I didn't even put like headers, but this is like the created date, who it came from, what the subject matter is, and then the first bit of the actual email. So that is something that I did. And if you were looking at this, let me just take a look at the code behind here with you. The actual list messages, it makes first it deletes from a temporary table where it ultimately puts the emails into for ease of display. And you wouldn't have to do that. You could, parse through and do something else. And then when it gets it back, it uses this subroutine to parse through the response data, and it uses the response data and plugs things into this new table and just adds fields from various pieces of the response info. You could do something different with it. You could take that email and you could perhaps put it into a temporary table, and then you could search that for certain things and then do certain things with it, or that kind of thing, process certain emails. Maybe you look in a particular email folder that you have rules set up for, as opposed to looking in people's inboxes, that kind of thing. Okay, Karen wants to know about attachments to emails. Yes, in the create or send email here, I actually have two buttons. One is to send and one is to create a draft. And oddly enough, maybe not, when you create a draft, it puts it in your draft folder, and then it gives you a little message, and this is the way I set it up. And it says, go to your draft folder and open it and edit it. Well, if you wanted to like add more to it, when it creates a draft, it's creating it out on the web. So this one sends it right away from here. But this allows you a copy, a blind copy, a subject, and an attachment. So, and I did add multiple attachments, so you could go in here and select multiple files, and it should work to add those attachments. It passes basically storing here are just path names to them. So those path names then get created. This is the create draft one, but they both do the same thing. Those attachments get pasted as a string list of paths. And yeah, well, so you would have that string list of paths, or you would create that string list of paths, and then you would pass that in to the create draft message. And this create draft message then takes that list of paths and it parses it out in this section here, in this subroutine where it parses it out and goes through, and then it treats them each as an individual attachment and adds it by the file name. Can you do anything more than instruct your user to go find it for yourself in your drafts folder? So again, Neil, this tool is designed to show you as a programmer how to interface with the Graph API. Your application can do whatever it wants as far as getting that list of paths to attachments or whatever. So you can you could pull it from data or something like that. I could see if you had, for example, an order and you had several pieces of documents for the order that you wanted to attach to an email, and that the paths to those documents were either in your order data, or maybe you use something specific like a certain directory structure where this type of document goes in this subdirectory and this type goes in another, and then the document name is your order ID or whatever whatever you use. But yes, your program could use that information in your program to call the right things. Did I answer that question? And feel free to come off mute if I did not. Yes. Could I show the authentication process for delegated permissions? Does it prompt for a password if you're not logged in? Yes. Let me go ahead and do that. Let me close this because I've already authenticated here. So I'm going to take a look at how I have this set up. Okay, I do have mine set up as authorization code right now. I'm going to the authentication piece. We saw this briefly earlier. We're going to go in here. Okay. So this is the first place. So this is, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to list contacts. And I am going to list contacts in my folder for security reasons called temp contacts. Okay, so because this is the first call after I have started here, the token is nothing. And the grant type is authorization code. So, but I don't have an authorization code. So it's going to go through this login process. So let me go ahead and let it do that and watch what's going to happen. It's going to pull this up. Now, if I had never authorized with this app, I would get a login prompt where I had to put my login and my password, and then I would get the scope bit where I would have to authorize the scopes. Those two things would come up, and then the screen would go away. I've already done it within the scope of this app, so it actually kind of auto did all that for me this time. And now I have an authorization code, which is a great big long code. And again, if you were using the other kind, it would skip that and it wouldn't need an authorization code, and it would just go to get the token. So here the token's nothing, but if I go down here to this, the next step will go out and it will get the token. And you see that the token now is a similar large thing. And then it uses that token to make the actual API call. This time it's got the token. And here we have the contacts displayed. Hopefully that answered your question. I know I didn't demonstrate exactly what it looks like when you log in there, but I think actually I put something like that in this one. So this is what it looks like. Show you here. It looks like this. First you have a normal type of sign in, the typical one that Microsoft does, and then you get like a permissions one like this, and then you have to click consent on behalf of your organization and accept. So that's what it looks like as far as a user interface. And they only have to do that once for your application. Then each subsequent time that they would come into your application, or if the token expired, it would show that screen, the edge screen, like a white blank screen for a couple seconds, and then it would close because it would do all this in the background. This is for app, Adrian. No, delegate, sorry. Yeah, I usually set them in the reverse order. I said delegate and then app, so that's why I got confused. This is for delegate type permissions. Other questions from people? I do see another question by Andrew that wants to know if this works with two-factor authentication enabled. And I have had some people report that it doesn't, but I don't see why it can't. So if you are trying to use this and your company requires two-factor authentication and that this doesn't work for you, I would love to work with you to make sure that this tool does work for you. I think the only thing that you might have to do to get that to work is to create a table for the edge form where you can set, I don't know if you're very familiar with the edge control or not, but there's a place where you can set a table here for trusted domains. And I think that as long as you have the table with the trusted domains that it needs to do that authentication and get through to that authentication code, that it should work. So I think that's the only missing piece. But since I don't have two-factor authentication for my company, I can't try this with anything. So I would love to get someone to help with that.
Like you, I imagine that it ought to work with 2FA because all of the authentication is done outside of the app itself.
It is. And
your code is just
yeah,
asking for what's already been worked out
yep,
by the user.
The other thing I did in the admin table is added a wait for login, which by default I think I set to 60, but you can change that. It is possible that with multi-factor authentication, you might need to extend that to be a little bit longer because that's how long that edge form that I ended up putting a timeout on that. I had somebody try this and they didn't see the edge form pop up. It like somehow was hidden on their screen. And so it just sat there in a loop and did nothing, right? So I had it time out or put a timeout in there to avoid stuff like that. But the authentication process, most of those have a timeout anyway. You have to like do it within a certain amount of time, but it might take longer than 60 seconds. So you might have to extend the time there. Oh, Colin missed the last 15 minutes. Well, you have to watch the YouTube recording.
Thank you. Not sure if I'm on audio or not.
Yep, I gotcha. Did you have any specific questions, Colin?
I can't remember. I've just spent 15 minutes trying to get back in. So,
So now you're
why
flustered.
does Windows decide to crash an update? That's my question.
Well, Adrian's been helping with the questions, and I think we've got everything answered here.
I would like to say that although I did the best I could answering questions, this isn't an area of my expert knowledge or speciality. So do feel free, if anyone had any answers that I answered and they weren't happy with, shout it up to Maria because she'll give you a better answer.
So Andrew, I'd be interested in knowing what have you tried with two-factor logins? Is this something you tried through a different interface rather than this, or did you try through this?
I could get the Graph API to work when using app-based permissions, and I could get the Graph API calls to work when using delegated permissions. But the minute I turned on 2FA, it just wouldn't work. And looking around, I was finding a lot of people saying that they tried and failed, and that it basically isn't possible through VBA because of VBA not talking to the Microsoft authentication systems properly. So it's a case of lots of playing and no success. I can't tell you necessarily I've done this, because it's been a case of doing lots of things and not actually getting anywhere.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I do it from other types of interfaces, for example, I use Azure SQL with one of my clients, and there's 2FA with that. And what the SQL Server Management Studio does is ends up taking you to an Edge tab, and you complete your authentication there, and then it leaves the Edge tab open with, I can see the authentication code right on it. And that's essentially what I'm doing with this. It's as a pop-up. So I just can't imagine it wouldn't work. But again, I would love if you're willing to put some time into helping me try it out. We could do a session and try this on your stuff.
Yeah, we should
love to do that. But I understand people are busy. So anyone who's willing to volunteer, contact me. What's next? We have our fall lineup coming up. Let me see if I can.
Oh, very quickly, did Neil put his hand down? I jumped in quickly earlier with Neil's hand up, and I thought once I was finished, he would have a chance to continue, but I don't know what's happened.
I did, but I was asking a question originally about you were giving an example of drafting an email and putting it into the user's draft folder. And I asked the question, are we limited to telling them to go find it there? I think what I'm really pertaining to is Graph going to help us with the quandary that New Outlook is not going to let us know what the user has done with our draft emails? So will Graph let us look at least through the data trail, what they've done with our draft emails? The normal scenario is we draft an email, put it into Outlook's editor for the user to edit, and then they click send or they cancel it. And at the moment, Outlook gives us an event to tell us that they've done that. But in the absence of that, can we look into their drafts folder, poll it, for example, to see if the email is still there?
Yeah.
More importantly, is there any audit trail that Graph gives us which tells us where it went from there?
So this is a good time to bring up that there are limitations to Graph. uh, the if basically if it's not in here somewhere, then you can't do it. And a good example of that is that as far as I'm aware, as of yet, there's no place where you can add like an email signature because that's not part of the exposed graph. However, you can list messages, and you can do so by looking at the different folders in the mailbox. This says, including deleted items, but you have a drafts folder in your mailbox. You have a sent folder in your mailbox, and you can access both of those folders through the Graph API. So you could certainly look at both of those things.
But have you got an identity
some
of the message?
information?
Have you actually got an identity of the message in order to know what to look for? Because that's what happens in Outlook.
Okay, yes.
Till it's sent,
Good.
the thing doesn't have an identity. So you
Good question. Yes, you can get an identity for the actual email. So
I've just typed a reply in the chat, Neil. There's specific, if you get the idea
with the API interface to do that. So when you send an email, maybe I should look at this because it's better.
While you're doing that, Maria, a very brief touch up with that. Basically, the draft email does have an ID, and there's also a property of the email which says whether it's draft or not. So once it's no longer draft, then that's the very basics of how you do it. I'm just paraphrasing Peter's response.
I think, where did I get that? Flagged for follow-up. I thought there was a way to actually send an ID number, like create your own ID number and send that as part of the message so that you could then keep track of that particular ID number. Maybe I saw that not on the mail, but on the calendar item. So that would be like your own fake ID number or something like that. But that's a good follow-up question. I will try to post some more information about that. So it's a good question. I do think there's a way to do that and attach, learn about the certain ID number. So here's an ID here that you're passing for a calendar item as part of your creation. So now when I first had that in there, I was doing like a random number and I tried that and then I got, there's already something out there created with your ID number on it. So I think you have to be a little bit more technical than that.
I think in the early days, there were problems with Outlook because when you sent because basically it assigned an ID which was unique only to your local data store, your PST file. I think that was the problem, and that in the early days, there wasn't a global ID which uniquely identified your email message.
Yeah. So I would think that in the response, there was an ID number of what was created. That's what I would hope. So when you send an email, then you have a response, and this is what it returns. But there's the request. Let's look at the response. Yeah, it just says this. But I would hope that there was actually an ID number. Maybe we should try it and see what we can see to the response. How's that? And before we do that, since we're just after the hour, let me just publicize next month. We have it at Access Lunchtime using custom and built-in functions in expressions with Crystal Long and Adrian Bell. And then in October, we have a Masterclass in Access Security with Colin Riddington. So those are the upcoming things that are going on. Okay, let's send a mail. And I'm gonna let me do the draft one.
Maria,
Yeah.
while you're drafting that, I can't see the screen, so I don't know what stage you're at. Can I just quickly advertise next week's Access Europe meeting?
Sure.
Next Wednesday, not tomorrow, Wednesday I think 3rd of August, we have Adam Waller, who is going to be demonstrating his free version control add-in with a focus on why it's useful for the sole developer. So I think that'll be a fascinating session. Please come along. I will post adverts for it online soon. Thank you. Sorry.
That'll be in September, not August.
Oh, yeah, that's a small detail.
Yeah,
Right.
because that's how we ride, right?
Yeah.
Wednesday, the 3rd of September. Oops.
Oh, by the way, also, Maria, James Spellman has a question outstanding for you in the chat.
About having.
Oh, sorry, you're busy here. Sorry, I didn't see that.
No, signing into Microsoft.
Yes, and keeping when you're signed in, keeping it going all day, so you don't have to keep signing in over and over again.
So the sign in, even at the using the delegated, is kind of behind the scenes, right? It just pops it up, that blank looking form, and that would only happen like after an hour or an hour and a half had expired and the token was no longer valid. And that is done through the actual internal calls, where it calls and repeats until if it gets a message back that it's a invalid token. But so it wouldn't be that frequent. Now, if you exit the app and enter the app, every time you enter it, it's going to do that. There is a concept of a refresh token, and I did play with that, but I wasn't able to get that to work reliably. So I thought that, having it kind of self-re-sign in every hour and a half would be a better solution. Now, of course, if you use the app base, then you don't get that. Okay, so response, we've got the status code, which is 201, which is the same as website created. And then you can actually view the response data. And I think this is the technique I want. Let's see, we did this. Neil, do you remember what we did? We used the JSON, pretty JSON or something, right? I think that's the technique. Okay, so this shows you what all it returned.
Oh, right, that's good.
So there's an ID right there. So this would be the identifier of the draft message that was created. And if I go over here to my mail.
Is that on another screen, Mary?
Yeah, I'm working on it. I don't want to show all my private data.
That's why it's just that people get a bit confused sometimes. Oh, I'm just doing this. You think, huh? No, don't feel you need to show.
No, but here's the actual email in my draft folder. It was that quick. But if I wanted to do something like I think Neil was suggesting, like check, did I hit the send button or not yet? Then I could look for this ID in my drafts folder using the Graphs API. If I didn't see it there, I could look in my sent folder. Maybe you're looking at recording a sent time or something like that.
Is there a find by ID somewhere? Is there a find message available in the API to say, given an ID?
Probably. I would have to look at the individual.
I think that's something for you to find and tell us about, Neil.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Which one is this? Oh, you know what? I overwrote it.
PJ's comment in the text, he reckons that, if you read by ID, it'll find it wherever it is. So there should be a way.
Somewhere I overwrote it.
Just want to call a time thing. It's 10 past
It is.
whatever hour you're at. I'm still good, but some people may need to rush off.
Yep. All right. So yeah, if anybody maybe you will find it. It could be moved, but the ID will locate it. Yeah. So that's a good point. Peter, I think mentioned is that this ID, I believe, stays with the message even if it gets moved. For example, like if you hit the send button and it moves it from the draft folder to the send folder,
Yeah, you'll
or
notice
you move it to wherever.
an idea of its
retains
parent
that
folder
ID.
there as well. So it's that ID, parent folder ID, is inevitably going to be the user's draft folder's ID. That's where the message is currently
Here's
sitting.
that. So yeah, I don't know. There's list messages. You can probably put an ID in here, I'm guessing, to find a particular one that I'm not sure exactly how, to get just one particular message, but I'm sure that there's a way to do it. Oh, here, it's giving you an ID number where you're, anyway. All right. Well, that concludes today's presentation, I guess. And yeah, I'm sure there's lots of information in those web responses that you could make use of. You'll unfortunately have to, explore some of that and learn more about it. Yeah, James, you have a question? Oh, you're clapping. Thank you. Yeah, and please feel free to either just reply to me directly or post in the GitHub about if there's things that, other things you would like to add to this or questions you have or problems you find with it. I'd love to keep getting feedback about it. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next month.